Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining our panel discussion today. As all of us know, the global supply chains have faced massive disruptions recently, and that's impacted demand planning. As part of the panel today, we are here to discuss how demand sensing could be the first step to build an agile end-to-end supply chain. So what this means is traditional demand planning techniques, which have worked over the ages, have started becoming more ineffective given the complexities that have evolved in supply chains. And we're going to talk about how enterprises can build a supply chain backbone using demand sensing, right? And some of the challenges that it entails. Given that context, it's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panel today that includes Lee Schlezak, who is the Vice President Information Technology from Tyson Foods. Thank you, Lee, for joining us today. We also have Jerry Fagan, who is a partner and director of data science at Boston Consulting Group. Thank you for your time today, Jerry. Thank you for joining us. We also have Praveen Kumbayal, who is the go-to-market head for EdgeVerve, who will also be participating in the panel and sharing his expertise. I once again thank all of the audience who've joined us today, and thank you, panel members. So I will turn it over to Praveen to do a quick keynote before we get the panel discussion started.
Lovely. Thank you, Narayan. I'm just going to bring up a few background slides. Narayan, can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
We can.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. All right. Again, thank you to co-panelists, and thank you to the audience for joining in today on this Edge Power Room, which is basically a thought leadership forum that we bring together from time to time. And in this case, today we're going to be talking about demand sensing and how it really helps drive a more agile supply chain. I think some of the complexities impacting supply chain we've heard and read so much about it in the last 2 years, and we're almost preaching to the choir to this audience. But clearly, based on some of the research that we've been doing and seeing in the market, there is an uptick in demand, so that's the good side of it. However, there are challenges that 56% of the respondents feel that there are fulfillment challenges in the industry that need to be solved for. And that has a significant impact on customer experience as well. Clearly, the fragmentation of demand has led to a high cost in fulfillment, particularly on the e-commerce channels, as compared to the more traditional brick and mortar challenges. So executives are calling out that while the consumer demand has got fragmented, that expectation of an omni-channel experience is right there, right up there. But there's a cost to fulfill that. As regards more the demand sensing and forecasting and the demand planning, almost half the CG executives are calling out a challenge about integrating data from multiple sources. And that's a top analytics challenge. And that's probably a good segue to kind of a trend that we see globally. Obviously, the trend of design anywhere, build anywhere, sell anywhere is here to stay. In some sense, the pandemic got people thinking about it afresh, but it became still that's here to stay. You probably need to de-risk, and that added even more complexity. What does that mean? It really means that the number of partner ecosystems from a supply chain perspective are really multiplying. Think of suppliers. I think they've added more. We try to become more focused from preferred suppliers, but then we're now also looking at de-risking those ecosystems. We've added many more fulfillment partners. Demand channels have got disaggregated. What that really means is that the number of interactions and data points have gone up manyfold. Your partners, their underlying processes or their underlying IT systems and the maturity levels thereof are dramatically different. You might have the best of connectivity to modern trade retailers who would give you the data that you want at the click of a button. to something in emerging markets, which you would have to chase, and at best you could get some weekly information. So really, that complexity has become even more acute. But all of the partners in this ecosystem need some reliance on the demand signals that they're getting from you. They want to see demand signals that they can trust and rely on, because everything is impacted downstream from there, right? So the benefits of demand sensing, to our mind, are not just limited to the front end, to the sales and marketing ecosystem, but really about in the entire fulfillment and your partner and your supplier ecosystems as well. And the urgency of these demand signals has become even more acute to our mind. When we started looking at the overall demand planning process, and you think of it like how it exists today, you have business units, you have commercial groups, they're bringing a lot of data together in the data hub, as it happens today, and there are demand planning centers of excellence which are bringing multiple functions together. There are statistical forecasting services. You're looking at really what those forecasts are. A lot of linear progression models in how they've been looked at, and all of that goes into some sort of a governance model. You're working with the front end and seeing what that how you release that forecast to supply, right? As such, we don't think the process has changed too much. What it has become is it's become far more dynamic given the nature of the consumer behavior today. What it also means is that the necessity of your data hub to have far more granular, consistent, near real-time data has become even more acute. A lot of investments in the forecasting layer have been driven by some really mature technology that helps drive integrated planning. A lot of machine learning progression has led to some state-of-the-art algorithms which can get really good in how they can forecast. But a lot of that is going to be great technology without having the fuel of great data. And that is an important element of how the ecosystem data of your supply chain partners, which has become more complex, is very, very necessary to fuel into the investments that have been made in machine learning and the planning ecosystems, right? So to our minds, we see demand sensing as kind of a feedback loop that helps drive enterprises towards the holy grail of autonomous planning, or synchronized planning, as some of the more recent frameworks from ASICS have started calling it. And to our minds, this whole iterative loop rests on three fundamental levers. The first is about saying, do I have coverage of my ecosystem partners? Do I have coverage of my demand channels, my retailers, my distributors, my fulfillment partners, my suppliers? Do I have a good global ecosystem visibility? Do I have coverage? One of our customers who's been working with us for years, building this whole demand ecosystem, today has about 70% coverage of their sales visibility and inventory visibility on the front end. So 70% of the time, they know what they sold or held yesterday at a SKU and store level today, right? So that's kind of the first lever, saying, can I get that global ecosystem visibility in place today? The second lever to our mind is about that visibility needs to be pretty granular, and it also needs to be very low latency data, because your consumers and their expectations, and particularly if it's impulsive category products, your e-commerce channels, those are getting really, really dynamic, and you need to have that low latency data for your forecast to be agile, to make sense. And even weekly is too late to our minds at these times. And so having that granular low latency data is the second lever to our mind. The third is the investments that are going into making the algorithmic forecasts, the machine learning investments that are going into make consumption-ready algorithmic forecasts. And really, the linear progression models have come far ahead to more multivariate causal frameworks and statistical analysis that is helping us derive forecasts that are linked to how a integrated business planning or demand planning environment might come together, right? So these three levers to our minds are extremely critical. And I just want to take one small example of how an enterprise has been leveraging this in a step-by-step manner, right? So first of all, they were bringing an entire demand ecosystem in play. and they were bringing in point of sale data from many of their partners with good coverage across the globe. So they had really good information sets, granular data, low latency data. They then started adding a lot of advertisement, and consumer promotion data, their merchandising data, and that's information sets that's coming in from their own internal requirement, internal ecosystems, right? We know today that almost 50% market share of your marketing spend is going into digital spend, and that growth rate of that has been even more than traditional print. And that feedback loop of those spend media is extremely relevant and very quick as well, right? So they started correlating this digital CX information with the point of sales data and started improving their forecasting. Further, they started building out, a more district information, more market-specific information. Started using some open source data in weather, in local economic information, some competitor information on promotions that might be running in those specific markets. And when you start correlating that as well and bring it into this whole algorithmic framework, you're starting to see forecasts which are also very granular, which are very market driven. And that's the whole micro market districting in some sense that they were doing, that were giving them forecasts at that granularity and helps improving their entire supply chain fulfillment ecosystem. Literally, inventories chasing where those micro demand was emerging at pretty low latency level and making them very agile. Now, obviously, the beauty lies in being able to scale this, right, and go beyond experiments in markets that you're testing this with, but really to scale this out. So I just wanted to use this as an example of how fine-tuned demand sensing is getting. And in some sense, to our minds, it's the dynamic glue that's connecting your supply chain ecosystem with your entire demand planning ecosystem and make us more agile in the market. It's probably a good segue to debate this with the panel. Got some great panelists on board, but Envy, at this point, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Praveen. I think that was indeed a great introduction and a nice segue into the topic that we're going to talk about with the panel. So let me start with Lee. Lee, could you briefly talk about your background and some of the supply chain challenges that you've been dealing with at Tyson over the past 2 years? It'd also be interesting for the audience to know about some of the wins that you've had, right, in the past couple of years addressing these challenges.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about our story. So my name is Lee Slazak, and I'm with Tyson Foods. I've been with the company about 4 years. I'm accountable for IT architecture, for emerging technologies, and analytics, which includes our data science teams. Prior to Tyson, I was at HP for 26 years. So I spent a lot of time in technology, and I can tell you in the last 4 years that I've been at Tyson, we've been able to really apply some advanced technologies to make material differences in how we function, operate, and to our financials. And it's been really exciting. You mentioned a few wins, and it's as I was listening to Praveen talk about some of the kind of up and coming technologies like autonomous planning. We actually just released an autonomous planning solution in January of this year, and we're seeing significant benefits from it. But in general, I'd say our wins over the last 2 years really has started to focus more and more on data. We did a big ERP transformation. We moved to S4 in the cloud for 2 of our 3 lines of business, and that was foundational for us. And ever since then, it's just been data and analytics, one project after another, to drive more and more value. So that's the focus area where we've had a lot of other work that we're doing, whether it's on the robotic side or automation. But in my world, it's all about data. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Lee. And Jerry, I will extend that same question to you. If you could maybe start with a brief introduction and a background and talk about some of the challenges and wins you've seen your clients have, that'd be fantastic, Jerry.
Great. Thanks, Narayan. My name is Jerry Fagan. I'm a partner at Boston Consulting Group based out of New York. And I'm in the Gamma group of BCG, which is our advanced analytics group of about 1,400 and growing data scientists worldwide. My focus is on applying advanced analytics to problems in supply chain and operations. I've done that my entire career. So starting out working at IBM in the research division, developing supply chain analytical solutions for the manufacturing divisions of IBM. Went back when IBM still manufactured stuff, and then working for a couple of different supply chain software companies, I2 and SmartOps, that then went on to be acquired by other companies. And then I moved into consulting, and so and that's where I've been for the last 20 or so years. So I work with clients across many industries, including CPG, retail, industrial goods, and I would say, virtually all the clients I've been working with have faced a number of supply chain challenges, both on the demand forecasting side and supply planning side. And I'll also say that many of the challenges over the last couple of years are really not new. Whether dealing with high demand volatility or multiple kinds of supply constraints and logistics constraints. So, these are not, for many people, they seem to be new, but they've actually been around for a long time. And one thing I'll talk about is, when the pandemic first hit in March of 2020 in the US, we got a lot of calls from our clients asking whether they should turn off their auto replenishment systems because they seem to be going haywire. They just couldn't trust what they were asking, and or trust what they were suggesting. And I think one positive thing from this is that our clients were starting to really take a critical look at these systems and how they work. And one of the observations is that most of the systems that are used for replenishment today, the forecasts are based on prior sales. And so you're in some sense looking in the rear view mirror to make a forecast. Now, in many cases, that's a reasonable thing to do. But I think one thing people start to ask the question about is under what circumstance, do forecasts that rely on prior sales work well? Like, when can we rely on them and when can't we? And then the follow-on question to that is, are there alternatives to use that don't rely so heavily on prior sales? And I think those are really two questions that we see a lot of our clients we work with asking those questions. I don't think they have simple answers, but I think it's the right set of questions to start asking.
I think that's a great point, Jerry. And just continuing on that, and all of us can acknowledge that consumer behavior has fundamentally shifted, right? And if you put yourselves in the shoe of us as consumers, we are buying more online. Omnichannel is becoming more prominent. What broad challenges, Jerry, do you see that brands face when it comes to accurately sensing demand, right? You spoke about looking in the rear mirror to do planning. What kind of challenges exist when brands do look at demand sensing as a topic, and can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think, first thing I always say is to acknowledge that demand forecasting is hard. It's a hard problem, and I think what I've seen is a lot of data scientists who are very sort of excited about applying machine learning models, and they get their hands on the first demand forecasting problem, and they realize, hey, this is not an easy problem to solve. There's a lot of volatility in demand, regardless of where you stand in a supply chain, and some of that volatility, let's just be honest, cannot be accurately forecasted. It's just a fact. But having said that, I think there's a lot that companies can do to better anticipate demand. And Praveen mentioned some of those, basically incorporating more timely, low latency data and accurate information into the forecast. So, for example, obviously in CPG and retail, one of the things that drives demand volatility is promotional activity. It's one of the major drivers. But what I've seen time and time again is that although data analytics can do a great job of understanding what's the uplift of demand as a function of different types of promotions, and those algorithms can work really well, but by themselves that doesn't give you a good forecast, because you need to also have a very disciplined promotion process, so that when your commercial organization says we're going to have a promotion, they put that in a promotion calendar and they stick to it, because otherwise your forecasts are going to be off. And as a result of, if you're changing constantly your promotion calendar. So what we see often is that, yeah, algorithms are part of it, building the algorithms that can predict the effect of different types of promotions on sale. But if you don't have the discipline in the organization to plan those promotions in a careful way and follow through with them, then that analytical effort is not going to be worth that much.
Understood. And Praveen, how do you see the industry evolving when it comes to demand sensing and being able to accurately know what's happening in the market? And what are you seeing your clients have, Praveen?
Yeah, so I think we're starting to suggest that, look, obviously data is most important. So we're seeing a lot of investments being made in making sure that we're curating good quality data. And that in itself is a huge enterprise challenge. I think Lee spoke about how you start internally and you brought your entire ERP ecosystem into play. And that itself has some timelines, but you just added complexity many-fold over when you start going out there and trying to curate information from all sets of your partners. And one of the sub points there is also about change management. How do you incentivize these partners to share their information? You want suppliers to share their inventory positions, and suddenly they're worried. Are you going to look for alternate suppliers because I'm just making myself very transparent, right? So one of those challenges. So the first there, to my mind, is about how do you curate the data. The other thing is also about, I think Jerry touched about a lot of investments going in the scaling up of machine learning and AI teams, and a lot of internal centers of excellence coming together to bear. But there's sometimes a good build versus buy balance that people are looking at, and the right partnering elements and the right products. So there's a lot of work happening there. But it's also about a trust factor. One of our customers going down the path of autonomous planning and saying, okay, now I'm going to take a step back and leave it to run, and leave the results to trigger actions that have far-reaching consequences. And it took them a lot of time to really build that confidence and trust in those models. So there were constant validations happening, and they scaled up pretty gradually till they felt that they could take their hands off in some sense from the trigger, right? So there is an element of trust and change management, both internally and externally. That is also another element of driving this change. And lastly, it's the holy grail, right? You're trying to bring an integrated planning environment together. We thought we had made good progress to be able to do it within the enterprise. Now you need to make this more synchronized across external partners as well. And that is a whole different channel, which will have different needs of an operating model that we are yet to come up about.
Understood, Praveen. And Lee, Tyson is a leader in the protein industry. So what's unique that you are seeing? I know some of the challenges that Jerry and Praveen talked about. Was there anything you could add to that in terms of what you're seeing as a protein industry and some of the challenges that you're seeing when it comes to accurately sensing demand?
Yeah, look, I think the items mentioned are really on point, and they apply to us as well. We've seen, as the pandemic came, and hit us all, a dramatic shift in consumer behavior. So a move away from, for our industry, away from food service, which is restaurants, quick service restaurants, and so on, to what we call retail, which is more of our grocery partners. And we worked hard to try and forecast transitions back and forth, but it was so unprecedented that it was very difficult to come up with the right signals and the right features to correlate to really understand when that might occur. So again, everything that was mentioned really resonates with me. A couple of things I might add. So look, I mentioned in my bio that I was at a tech company for most of my career, and now I'm in an 85-year-old food company, which it's awesome, right? Because we get to really use technology to drive value quickly. But I'll tell you, it's different, because the management of change, the ability to drive adoption in business units that are used to, for many, many years, running their business in an analog way or through Excel or some kind of offline tools, it doesn't work anymore. At the scale and the complexity and the speed at which we have to move, human beings and Excel cannot really drive the kind of value that we need. And so convincing people to trust the machine has been a challenge. I mean, I think Jerry mentioned, or maybe Praveen mentioned, one of the clients with their autonomous planning and being really able to trust the machine. And so that's part of what we've done there, is to have a human in the middle. And so we have, the first phase of this is a set of recommendations on how to really ensure that we have the right efficiency and all the noise out of our system with recommendations. And if the planner chooses to accept the recommendation, it's a click of a button, all the SAP transactions happen behind the scenes. If they choose not to, we capture that reason as well, because our eventual goal is to build models on top of this to say, okay, based on the situation and based on historical performance of what we've accepted and not, let the machine make those decisions. But it's going to take us a while to get there.
Okay, perfect. Just continuing and taking this one step further, Jerry. So we've spoken about how consumer behavior is changing and also about some of the supply chain complexities and their impact on traditional demand planning. What do you see as the way forward for organizations and brands that you work with, considering you work across a wide variety of industries? What do you see as the way forward for organizations when it comes to improved demand planning, Jerry?
Yeah, I think a good question. Before I get to that, I just want to say, Lee's comment about what you've done in terms of kind of building a human in the middle is something that very much resonates with me, because at BCG we use the term bionic to basically say, look, these systems that we build, these automated and these sophisticated algorithms, in our experience, we don't see them working completely autonomously. There needs to be a human in the loop, and I'm glad to hear that at Tyson that you're embracing that idea, and it involves getting trust from the users in the system, but it's also not saying take that human judgment out of the loop either. It's finding the right balance, which is frankly where the challenge is, I think. But anyway, to your question, Ryan, I think the move to omni-channel for many retailers, it's presented a number of challenges to the standard way of doing things in terms of both planning, supply chain planning, and execution. And I think companies are realizing that changing these processes to deal with the many ways in which consumers expect to be able to purchase and receive their goods is difficult. And I think one thing that companies need to think about is, especially in the area of demand planning, is, for example, to try not to forecast demand for individual SKUs for every possible fulfillment channel separately, because it becomes a hugely complex and difficult problem. Because the more sort of fine-grained your forecast is, the more volatile your demand signal is. And so setting things up so that your reliance on the forecast at that level of granularity is lessened, I think, is a really key thing. So your fulfillment, if you can design things so that you can forecast across channels, so that and you're planning and leveraging things like late customization or other capabilities to be able to lower the reliance on forecasts, because on very, very granular forecasts. I think that's really important. The other thing is that I don't think this is all just a question about demand planning. I think it's also about supply planning, about where to position goods in the supply chain for maximum responsiveness and flexibility. And it's also about how to dynamically, if you think about omni-channel, how to dynamically decide how to fulfill orders given current inventory and different modes of delivery that are available. One thing I see a lot is that the fulfillment systems that a lot of our clients have are very rigid. They have a sort of a static set of rules for how to fulfill demand. And what they need to, I think there's an opportunity to move away from that static set of fulfillment rules to a much more dynamic way of thinking. Like, what an order comes in, how do we fulfill it based on how things inventory currently sits in the network, and that might change in the next hour or 2 hours, so you fulfill it differently. But systems today, I think most of the systems that are deployed that I see with their clients are kind of rigid in that regard. So I think there's a big opportunity there.
I think two great points, Jerry, especially the first one that you spoke about, which I would say is slightly contrarian to how demand planning most people think about, which is to get granular and get demand planning down to the SKU. I think that I hope was insightful to our audience, and of course your point on concurrent planning and making sure that you have supply and demand planning in account. I think that's a great point. And Lee, as a technology leader, is somebody who's been in this space for a really long time. What solutions are you deploying at Tyson, or are you exploring to improve demand planning accuracy? I think you did highlight some of those, but I think it'd be good for the audience to hear specifically about that, Ali.
Well, I would again throw back to what Jerry said about the rigidness of a lot of the. I guess I wouldn't call them legacy systems, but the traditional planning and execution systems are built around a pretty rigid set of processes, and typically when the demand from one of our partners comes in to be able to provide this kind of flexibilities, we've got a couple of choices, right? And one of them, which I would encourage everyone not to do, is to customize that off-the-shelf system. And what we do is we work with much more nimble, agile systems that we wrap around those traditional systems, whether it's technologies like Palantir Foundry, or even on the kind of more rigid side, we do use SAP IBP. But again, there's even limitations there. And so what we find ourselves doing is a lot of our ML work happens outside of those core systems, and then they become inputs into those core systems, or they become triggers for optimizations where we'll look across our supply network or across our network of facilities and say, okay, where do I have inventory that's stranded, or where do I have trucks that are not fully filled, and how can I manipulate kind of the core system based on a set of rules and models to optimize those and then drive the inputs in. And that's really been our strategy, whether it's been around how we optimize ingredients and yield, and commodity pricing, or whether it's been how we move inventory between our facilities. We do have a handful of solutions that we've put out there that really rely heavily either on complex sets of big data with just rules, or in other cases where we actually have some models that are driving it. But in either case, it's really focused on how do we keep and protect the transactional core as it should be, and then put in place the capabilities around it and integrate smartly so that we're not in a scenario where when we get the next patch or upgrade, we're in some kind of a multi-week or monthly scenario where we've got so much testing to do because we've customized so much. So that's been our strategy. We've got a long road on this journey that we're going down. We have so many use cases that are coming at us left, right, and center. And I think the most exciting thing is the time to value on this stuff is incredible. What we've seen, even with the autonomous planning that we just put in place a couple of months ago, we're already at 6x the cost of implementation in terms of value. And that's just within a couple of months. So it's incredible that when you get it right, how right it can be.
I mean, that's great to hear, and I'm going to come back to you, Lee, and hear more about some of the other use cases that you've been able to deliver value to. I think that's going to be insightful for the audience. But Praveen, I wanted to turn the same question over to you and see what your thoughts were in terms of what you're seeing your clients deploy when it comes to improving demand planning accuracy, and how demand sensing is playing a role there.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And some great inputs, Jerry, Lee, that are really connecting some dots, right? So if you take a step back and look at it from a technology perspective on where we are today, I see big shifts are driven, and this is what some of the futurists talk about, right? They're driven by some amount of convergence. And if you look at what the technology trends have been that have been converging here, one is digital technologies, right? Our ability to connect ecosystems together. At EdgeVerve, with our TradeEdge platform, we made it our business. We have a demand ecosystem that connects 5 million retail touch points today across the globe. That's about 100 plus countries that we cover, right? So there's a big digital platform, digital technology play that's able to bring all of this ecosystem data together. So that's been one convergence, the one data trend. The other is about cloud, right? I mean, you couldn't have done this if you were not on the cloud. So that's been the second mega trend. The third is about compute. You're looking at all of these algorithms running in point manner on point data and then being able to bring it back. That's been the third mega trend there. And to bring it all together, the way we've been approaching this market is by saying, and speaks so much to what Lee was saying, we don't want to be the core system. You don't want to go around changing left, right, and center because that's going to take you years to realize value. Do it on an overlay layer, or do it, as we call it, the over the top layer, which is where you blend in these convergence of these technologies, and then you're creating point interventions that flow to those underlying systems, those ERPs that make it more, and then flow into a more traditional fulfillment ecosystem. The intelligence lies in that over the top layer. And that ecosystem brings digital technologies, data, and these point algorithms that flow into those ecosystems. That's the way we see this whole investment kind of pairing out. And that's where we are invested in as well. All right.
That's fantastic, Ryan. I think that does tie what we heard from Jerry and from Lee. We have a question from the audience, which I think is very pertinent. So someone in the audience wants to know, what is the effective method to enhance customer delivery when supply lead time is high and demand is uncertain? I guess this also goes back to a point that Praveen was making. About 50% of supply chain experts feel that there is delays in supply delivery. So I don't know, Lee or Jerry, I think it'd be great to hear from both of you. Jerry, do you want to go first and address the question that we have from the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, it's the classic problem. You've got to make replenishment and purchasing or production decisions in certain situations in which you have long lead times, and so there you have to be able to forecast accurately over those lead times to give a good signal to either manufacturing or suppliers. I mean, a classic example of where this problem crops up all the time is in the semiconductor industry, where semiconductor devices lead times are measured in many months. So they've got to start product into the fab well before they get actual customer orders, and so so it's a common problem. And there's not I wouldn't say there's a silver bullet there, but first thing is to just be very clear when you think about what don't overcomplicate the problem. Forecast at the level that is required to make the decision. And what we see a lot of times is you end up forecasting at a more granular level than is really required to drive the decision, and that degrades accuracy, because all else being equal, the finer level, whether you're forecasting, whatever level of granularity you're forecasting, more granular is going to be less accurate than higher levels of granularity. And so just thinking about what is required, and then trying to think about ways to reduce the reliance on those especially long lead time forecasts, because those are going to be inaccurate as well. And I think there's often opportunities in terms of either building in the semiconductor industry, having where you get a lot of the device proliferation is in packaging, so it becomes an easier problem to forecast before packaging. And so if you can just exploiting certain facts that may exist in your particular industry to make the forecasting problem less difficult. I think that's the key.
I think that's a great point, Jerry. You're iterating the point about simplification of the problem statement, even, right, and not overcomplicating it. And Lee, moving from semiconductors to the protein industry and or the food industry in general, what do you see as an effective method, since you also have constrained capacity? So what do you see as an effective method to enhance customer delivery when lead time is uncertain?
Look, I mean, you're right. We do have constrained capacity, and it's, in a lot of ways, it's not a bad place to be because we've got great demand. But it forces you to have a series of choice points of, you can look at it two ways. Who do you upset or who do you make happy, right? And so when we look at kind of our overall network and system, this is a challenge for us. I mean, servicing the customer is by far our one of our top priorities beyond team members and safety. And what we've been looking at as of late is really how do we drive as much noise as possible out of the system? Because whether it's demand planning or demand sensing, anything that relies on your internal private data, if you've got noise in that data, whether it's inaccuracies in master data or inconsistencies, or things like phantom inventory, or just changes that get made on the factory floor that don't get replicated up into the system, it causes surprises, it causes challenges. And so the more noise we can remove from the system by continually monitoring on, I think we look at across our network, I think it's every 8 or 9 minutes, we're looking at inventory positions, we're looking across all the key KPIs that we have in order to make whatever adjustments we can in terms of planning. Because again, I go back to that example, anything around stranded inventory for us is a real problem, because if we have a set of inventory that lands in a distribution center or a plant or a cold storage facility, look, there's a shelf life. Some industries have a shelf life that's really long. We don't, and it's really important to us as we deliver food across the globe that's high quality and fresh and timely and healthy for everybody who consumes it. And so we find ourselves really looking across the board at, okay, where are these inefficiencies? And from, I'm on the system side, so I will focus my comments there, but where do I have noise in the data and where can I remove that? Because the cleaner your signal is, the cleaner your sensing is going to be, the cleaner your planning is going to be, and the cleaner your execution is going to be.
I think all great points, Lee. And you did talk about other use cases in addition to demand planning that you're working on. So, and I know you do a lot of work in the analytics space as well, Lee. So could you talk about some other opportunities where you've been able to leverage both analytics and technology more broadly to improve business outcomes, and what some of those results have turned out to be for you?
Sure. I mean, we've got, if you look at our kind of technology strategy, it's threefold. One, we started on a journey about 5 years ago to have standard and global systems to really level the playing field so that there's a single set of core systems that provide the same capability no matter where our facilities might be. And then building on that, what we aimed to do was to modernize our data platform. So we've moved fully to cloud, truly a modern data environment that can enable us to move into predictive and eventually prescriptive analytics. And that's kind of foundation 2 of our strategy. And then finally, for us, an area where we've got some significant challenges is physical labor on the plant floor. These are difficult jobs that require skilled people. However, there are a number of areas, whether it's moving materials or packaging, where we can employ automation and robotics. And so that's kind of the third leg of the stool of our strategy in the technology space. And so we've got use cases across those. The ones that are not nearly as exciting, but absolutely important, one would be master data. I mean, that's, you harmonize a few companies together through acquisitions, and suddenly if you have 3 names for the same product or 10 different addresses for the same customer or supplier, things go bad. On the opposite side of that, we've actually done quite a bit with computer vision. We have, I believe, 8 of our poultry plants have a computer vision based inventory system, to where we can infer product types at the edge, what the product is, look up the SKU. We can look up various IoT data such as weight and other information, and then update systems. That's allowed us to, I'll go back to my point about removing the noise from the system. Again, we still apply human in the middle. So in that example, an operator will push product underneath the camera. There's a human looking at the screen. The machine says, here's what I think the SKU is. Here's what I think the weight is. The operator can look at readouts next to it and say, yep, that's what it is. Wait, that's what it is? Yes. And it not only does it reduce the risk of trusting the machine, it improves the accuracy because it's basically built-in training. And that's always the trickiest part is data and training in these ML solutions. So look, we go the whole gamut. We're having a heck of a lot of fun and delivering a heck of a lot of value with some really cool tech at Tyson.
I think, I mean, very, very exciting to hear. And I think very prescriptive, if I may, use cases that I believe the audience can leverage. So Praveen, from where you sit, what are some other areas where you see organizations making an investment? I know it's a very broad question to ask, but was there any one or two areas that our audience on this call should be looking at?
We're seeing a few, Narayan, and again, one of them is up Lee's world as well, which is more in the traceability space. Really being able to know the source and confidence, and the comfort, particularly in that business, and that becomes extremely important because one of our customers has been the entire Infosys and EdgeVerve ecosystem is at helping them build a great environment for having the ability to recall. And their challenge was to saying, hey, I want to be able to recall in 4 hours from wherever I am across the globe. And that is coming out of quality system checks that are happening at the plant on exit points and stuff like that, right? So that's a great use case that we've seen. We saw some very interesting work. We've seen some work that we're doing with one of our other customers in. It's on the forecast side, but it is now getting very granular so the entire e-commerce ecosystem, and particularly with Amazon and some of the larger retailers and e-commerce, your ability to fulfill that demand leads to timely demand fulfillment, leads to better rating, penalty avoidance, and so on and so forth. But you get a forecast at a regional level or at a national level, and that doesn't help because you really need a forecast at a DC level. And then so to break that down with the right variables at a DC level, and then connect that to the fulfillment systems of that particular DC, which will serve them best, and hence see your improving of your rating and loss avoidance, penalty avoidance, etc. There's some really good work happening in that as a use case to support the entire e-commerce fulfillment more specifically. So these are a couple of things that I can think of. And of course, lastly, on the supply side, right? When you're bringing, it's been easy to bring a retailer and a distribution ecosystem together. It gets more complex when you go to the supplier side because those ID maturities are even lesser, and their drivers and their what they want to see as a benefit from your demand signal is not as clear. So bringing your supplier ecosystem in one place, seeing their inventory position, and being able to kind of trace your bill of material to kind of de-risk, saying, okay, I know my primary supplier. Do I know my secondary? And how do I trace that down to kind of get some advanced level view of the underlying risk there? Is another use case that is very early stage, I would say, but that's also an interesting space that is kind of seeing traction.
Okay, and then something to keep an eye out for sure. So we do have one more question from the audience. So I think it'd be very interesting to hear from all three of you on this. So the question is around how have we seen organizations recovering from the disruptions created in the supply chain, and what can be the better way forward, right? So, I mean, what can be the learnings? And Jerry, I think you did talk about the fact that maybe not all of these challenges are new, but what do you see as the way forward, and what can be the learnings as we move forward from the experience that we have had in the last couple of years, Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, we've seen companies struggling with all manner of supply chain issues, both on the demand side as well on the supply side and logistics side, and I don't see that those changes are going to, or those challenges are going to go away anytime soon. I think that these challenges will continue. There'll continue to be supply shortages. There'll continue to be logistics shortages and demand volatility. I think one of the key things that we haven't talked about too much, which is one thing that we see clients across many industries struggling with is finding the right talent to support both supply chain activities and the analytical functions. And I think really that's something that, you know, uh, clients need to really double down on, and how to not only attract and keep people who understand those, these functions well, but also building that muscle from within and sort of making sure that people who are, your best asset are the people that you currently have, and how do you train them to get up the learning curve, both in terms of advanced analytics and in terms of supply chain concepts. And I think that's where a lot of the energy should go, frankly.
And that's great to hear. I think all great call outs. And Lee, I did see you nodding and
Oh,
agreeing
yeah.
to what Jerry was saying, especially when it came to talent shortage. So, what would you add to what Jerry said, Lee?
Look, I would just completely agree, especially in the technology sector. And then if you double click down into analytics or even advanced analytics, the demand is through the roof. I mean, one of the side effects that we saw from the pandemic was um, data is king. And a lot of organizations, including our own, realized they had to start trusting the data in addition to kind of the people that have that legacy sets of knowledge and really understand the processes in the business, because we couldn't be physically places we wanted to be any longer. And so data became really, really important. And, I look across my organization and the talent I have is top notch. I mean, we've got great people that do amazing things, but every other company out there wants the same set of talent that we have. And, you look at the inflationary measures that we see across salaries and just overall cost, and you can pick any region because we've got offices, in India, we've got them here in the US. We're looking at Europe, but across the board, there's a lot of volatility in that salary market. And so I think Jerry's really right. It's not just can I attract them, but how do I retain them? And how do I retain them in such a way that they don't ever want to leave? And, part of our approach, you've heard me talk about some, I think, pretty advanced technology stacks. And I think one of the things we've done over the last 4 or 5 years is to move out of legacy environments, move away from some of the older technologies that just can't move at the pace we want to. But the other side effect of that is it attracts key talent. If you've got the hottest tech stack on the block, that's what people want to work on. And so it's not our prime motivator for the technology stack we have, but it's a nice benefit. But certainly I would say talent is key. If I think of other ways to try and de-risk the disruption, more visibility, really understanding what you have, and lower latency. I think the days are gone when you can look at what happened last week. It needs to be what happened an hour ago or 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago. So it's a broad question. I think there's lots of opportunities, but those are the things that were top of mind for me.
I think that those are very, very good call outs, Lee, and I think something that resonates with everyone. I know we are in the last 5 minutes of the panel, so this has been extremely insightful for all of us. So I'd just like to end with one question, kind of extending what we were just talking about, and asking each of you to look into a crystal ball and let our audience know what you see as the top 3 challenges that will continue to impact supply chains in the next 12 to 18 months, and what can organizations do today to start preparing for that, right? So, Jerry, I'll start with you and then go to Lee and then to Praveen.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I sort of alluded in my previous comments about just, that I think the next 12 to 18 months probably are not going to be qualitatively very different from what we've seen in the past 24 months. There may be some easing of some of the logistic challenges that we've seen, especially in international freight. But, when the timing of that happens is anyone's guess. I think, but I do think, to echo some of the comments that both Praveen and Lee made about key kind of basic capability that I think companies can go after. It's one of the things that we often see with companies that are sort of starting down this digital journey is standing up a control tower capability of enabling visibility, real-time visibility. And it could be around inventory, it could be around production, sales, back orders, and so on. But what I see for a lot of clients who are just sort of starting out on advanced analytics is standing up a control tower capability is hugely valuable, and it has a really quick payback. And then it's something on which you can build more predictive analytics on. You need that basic data to do predictive analytics. So starting with the descriptive analytics of a control tower and then building on that is a great sort of a stepping stone and a way to proceed for those companies that are not that sophisticated to begin with.
Got it. And Lee, how do you see the next 12 to 18 months?
Before I answer that, I'll say it's ironic. I mean, what Jerry described is exactly what we did. So first we stood up our whole logistics control tower, which then drove us to the planning kind of activities. But look, I think the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to continue to see inflationary pressures across the board, whether it's with the cost of talent or the cost of goods. And I think that's going to drive the need for more efficiency, more cost savings. And, the way we try to translate that in our organization is more insights. I mean, the organization that I lead is called Insights as a Service, and that's what we do every day. We look for opportunities through insights to drive value. So I think inflation will be big. I think shortages and supply disruptions will continue. So the volatility and uncertainty, especially with what we see kind of in some of the geopolitical actions that are happening now in Europe. And then lastly, I would say, look, I hate to do it and go back to talent, but I will. I mean, for us, you got to protect your base. And so what I tell my teams is, number one, you should always be hiring. Even if that means you're not making an offer, you're always networking, you're always finding the right talent. And more important than that, you're taking care of your team. Your team is key. Without them, we just have ideas, but with your team, you've got actions and value. So that's my view.
I think that's a fantastic way to summarize that, Lee. And Praveen, any closing thoughts in terms of what you see as the top 3 challenges and the path forward, right, in the next 12 to 18 months?
No, and I think Lee and Jerry have covered the challenges so well, and have that business flavor to it as well. Look, from a technology perspective, the next 12 to 18 months, I see 2 key things. One is that there would be a scaling of the demand sensing programs that organizations have started, and it becomes more center stage. More confidence will be built around those programs, and we'll start making a better move towards the whole autonomous supply chain program. The other thing to my mind is going beyond the enterprise. And this is what we've made a mission for ourselves for the next 12 to 18 months, is that we want to get these supply chain ecosystem partners to become more interoperable. Having the ability to get the visibility was a start point. And if that's been a journey for the last 5 years, the next 12 to 18 months would start about saying, hey, I'm just not going to be autonomous within my enterprise, but I want to get more interoperable. I want to get my partners to see more real time on what my actions are, which will determine what their actions look like. And that's a big mission for ourselves, to bring all of these into a network of sorts. And that's our focus area for the next 12 to 18 months.
And that's great to hear, Praveen. And any closing thoughts, Jerry, Lee, or Praveen, that we didn't get to share so far? We're at the top of the hour, so I just want to make sure that we can wrap this up in time. But I had a lot of fun moderating this session, and this was extremely insightful for me. But I'll just turn it over to Jerry, Lee, to see if you had any closing thoughts.
Well, thank you for hosting this, and I think, as you can tell, this is a very rich subject. There's lots to talk about. We barely scratched the surface in an hour, and I think for the audience members who are kind of, I think one of the challenges is, how do you prioritize what you do first, and how do you get your arms around all the challenges that you might be facing, and I think it's just really what I want to encourage people is to not get overwhelmed with all of the different challenges and sort of take them one at a time, prioritize them based on business value and where you see the biggest problem, and then tackle them. And with the multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary teams that you need to tackle these problems, whether it's people with data science backgrounds or people who are deep in supply chain or people who understand the business dynamics well. You need all those parties coming together to solve these problems effectively.
Got it. Your last word?
Yeah, hey, let me just echo what Jerry said. Thank you for pulling this together. It's great to have an opportunity to share some thoughts and really hear some insights from thought leaders around the industry. So thank you very much. And the only thing I would leave the team with or the audience with is a lot of times you hear these talks and it's about things that could happen or things that might happen. This stuff's real and it adds real value and it's possible. But you do have to get your foundations right. And once you do, as I mentioned, the time to value is impressive, and it can really make a material difference for your company.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you once again for taking the time to join us today. And I hope the audience found this beneficial. And if there are any questions that didn't get addressed during the session, we'll make sure that gets addressed offline. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.